Welcome to this podcast about volcanoes. Remember to listen to this podcast as many times as possible. Try and make notes based upon the information that you hear. It's a good idea to then test yourself by trying to summarise the information into as few words as possible.
Thanks for those revision tips. Just by listening to this, you're already really helping yourself with your revision. Well done.
So, what causes volcanoes then?
Volcanoes occur around the world along plate boundaries. They are found on both destructive and constructive plate margins. A volcano is formed by magma being forced to the Earth's surface as a result of plate movement and then erupting out of the crust in the form of lava. This eruption often happens at high pressure. A major area of volcanic activity is around the Pacific Ring of Fire. Volcanoes can have many devastating effects.
Yes, I've heard about those, but can't there be positive effects as well?
That's right. It's important to remember that many people choose to stay living close to volcanoes because cheap, renewable geothermal energy can be created in volcanic zones. Volcanoes can also create dramatic scenery which attracts tourists. In turn, the presence of tourists creates a multiplier effect because they help boost the economy by encouraging the development of many tourist-related jobs.
What, like tour guides, shop assistants and hotel receptionists?
Yes, that's right. Farmers benefit from volcanic eruptions too, because the deposited lava and ash enriches the soil with minerals and therefore crop production is improved and increased. But it's not all good news, is it?
Sadly not. When volcanoes erupt, homes and people can be burnt by the pyroclastic flows, volcanic bombs and ash clouds. These primary effects can lead to negative secondary effects such as disruption to local communities, homelessness and loss of livelihoods, which in turn leads to costly and time-consuming. Another secondary effect is respiratory diseases caused by ash as well as death due to illnesses and dehydration due to contaminated water.
I also remember in March 2010 that thousands of people around the world were affected because of the no-fly zone that was created over northwest Europe as a result of the Icelandic eruption.
Yes, we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
Okay, so what prediction, preparation and management methods are there for volcanic eruption?
There are a number of ways of predicting and preparing for volcanoes. These methods can be expensive and so often more applicable to MEDCs. This can mean that MEDCs are more able to cope with volcanoes because they have the money and technology to deal with them, but there are ways in which LEDCs can prepare too. Volcanoes can be predicted using seismographs which measure ground tremors as well as tilt meters which are also used to measure the shape of the ground. If the ground starts to bulge, it can be a sign that a volcano might be about to erupt.
That all sounds quite expensive. What can LEDCs do?
Well, they can monitor changes in animal behaviour and recording whether smelly gas such as sulphur is being released on the ground. People can also be educated and have good evacuation plans in place as well as having well-trained emergency services. Channels can be created in the ground before an eruption to guide the lava away from urbanised areas. This obviously helps reduce the cost of damage and disruption to local people.
So, we've talked about causes, effects and management of volcanic eruptions, but it's really important to have some good case study examples to back up your knowledge, isn't it?
That's right. Exam questions may say, use your own knowledge or use the examples that you've studied. That means that the examiner is going to be looking for evidence of case studies and will be able to award more marks if it's in the answer.
So, what LEDC case study would you use?
Well, the volcano on Montserrat in the Caribbean, which erupted over a period of 2 years from 1995, is a good example. This was located on a destructive plate margin, and the ash cloud and pyroclastic flows were so huge that over half the island had to be evacuated. Even now, many of the population have not returned to the island, and this has caused lots of social problems.
That's a good example, although you could use the example of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, which erupted in June 1991 after remaining dormant for hundreds of years. This was also on a destructive margin, and although it occurred in an LEDC, there were only 6 deaths because the nearby USA military base had scientists who were monitoring movement, and so thousands of people could be evacuated in time. However, the volcano killed livestock and destroyed crops, and so 600 people died as a result of the secondary effects of illnesses, disease and mud flows. Power and water supplies were also cut off for 3 weeks and roads were unpassable.
That sounds pretty grim, and a clear-up operation obviously took a long time because of a lack of money and resources available because it is an LED.
Yes, you're right. Unlike the Icelandic volcano, which erupted in March 2010, which we mentioned earlier. The Icelandic volcano, the one with the unpronounceable name, is located on a constructive plate margin. The ash cloud reached over 55,000 feet, and although no one was killed, 500 people did have to be evacuated from the local area. The main effects were secondary though. Hundreds of flights had to be cancelled because of concerns that the ash particles would affect planes' engines, and as a result, thousands of holidaymakers were stranded, and many commercial flights couldn't deliver their cargoes to their destinations. The economic effects were gargantuan. Estimates have put the cost to airlines alone at around $1 billion, and that's before all the costs to businesses that couldn't run properly because staff were missing have been taken into account.
Well, there goes the bell, so that must be it now. Causes, effects, management and case studies of volcanic eruptions. Thank you to Maddy Welham for writing this podcast. We hope that you found it useful and good luck with your revision and your exam.